Hello. I'm so grateful to be doing this talk. And I want to first thank the president of the Philosophical Research Society, Greg Sawyer, as well as Kelly Carmena, who wears many hats, vice president, librarian, and more. I also want to share with you that this talk came out of a desire for me to bring in a mythological and even spiritual perspective or element to the discussion of the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus. Not to disregard the practical and medical elements, but to perhaps allow for a new perspective or a more soulful perspective, maybe, which might be helpful as a mirror for other people. I also want to say that this is quite personal for me. I have several members of my family suffering with the virus at the moment across the globe. And I am considered a high-risk case because of my autoimmune disorder as well as problems with asthma. So I am not taking this on lightly at all. And I wanted you to know that. Let's start with our first slide. And for me, this slide is interesting because it illustrates aspects of liminality, which is the time we're living in right now. I took this picture at sunset on one of my regular walks. And my former student, Andrew Leslie, was able to bring even more forward this quality of the in-between and liminality that this represents. Liminality is both spatial and temporal. It has both elements to it. And so sunsets, sunrises are in essence liminal times because they carry a certain instability, which then opens the door to the unexpected and even to the possibility of transformation. And this is one of the things that I will be talking about as well. I'm not going to play this for you right now, even though it's beautiful, because the sound recorded on Zoom is not very good. But I want to suggest to you that you definitely go on YouTube and listen to the Great Bell Chant, which was created by Thich Nhat Hanh, by the monk Thich Nhat Hanh. So I'm going to start with a dream, because the dream world is the essence of the in-between, of liminality, of the transitional between life and death, between this world and the other. And when dreams are tended with respect, they can put us in relationship with psyche in a deeply healing way. This is probably the closest we have to an organic connection to the world of the in-between, since most of us lack a strong relationship with the sacred through daily ritual. I'm not sure that people who go to church on Sunday have a deep participation mystique or transformational experience every time. The other liminal space, meaning a space that contains the possibility of transformation that we have in our culture, I believe is psychotherapy. Carl Jung thought of the analytical hour as a temenos, a sacred space during which something significant could occur. So here is my dream. And I have my notes here, so I'll be referring to them once in a while. I'm walking with a guide, a young man, and I know in the dream I absolutely trust him. I suppose Jung would refer to this figure, inner figure, as an animus character. Certainly a guide. And we are looking for a place to eat. And I'm driving, and everything is covered in snow. And we reach a place, but they only serve sandwiches and pizza, and it really doesn't look very good. So we decide to move on. It's not the food I want, even though I'm really hungry. So we keep going, and I see that there are other people also walking now in the snow, and we leave the car behind because there's too much snow to drive. So we're on foot now. And I'm getting hungrier and hungrier. And we get to another place, but now it's closed. And I start thinking, oh, I wish I'd stopped at the first place. But even if I wanted to go back now, I couldn't find it in the snow. So we keep going, and we're in the woods now. And then I see some markings left by an animal in the snow. And the thought occurs to me that when I was a child, I knew the meaning of these markings and I could follow them. And right after I have that thought, my guide makes a 90-degree turn off the woods and the track that everybody's been following. And we literally step out of the snow and find ourselves in the square of a village. And it's literally midnight, the middle of the night. And everything is dark. You can see the outline of buildings in the distance surrounding the square, but you can't really see anything. And there's no one around. And the only light comes from a lamppost illuminating the middle of the square with the circle of light. So we're there, and there's a crisp quality to the air. It's mountain air. It's very fresh and cold, but it feels good, and I feel like I can breathe. And then suddenly, out of the darkness, comes this enormous creature. Black wolf mixed with a little bit of shepherd dog, mostly black wolf. And either I've become the size of a child again, or he's really enormous. And my guide comes forward and approaches the wolf dog creature, and they start to communicate without words, but I can see they're having a conversation. And after a while, my guide turns into a dog and just walks off around the corner of a building and disappears. And I'm face to face with this enormous black creature. Comes right up to my face. And he could literally bite my head off, but he doesn't. Instead, he starts speaking to me in his own language, with a lot of strength and power. And I feel almost like I should be able to understand, but I don't. And something in me realizes that we are being reconnected for the first time in a very long time. and then I wake up. Sometimes the breakdown of a boundary, the very excess of an image, like this wolf dog creature, creates such a feeling of dislocation or chaos that we are compelled to search for new meaning. This sense of being taken out of ordinary reality and into chaos is the essence of liminality. It's also very much part of the times we're living in right now. With the dream, what came to me at the time was the immense amount of power stored in the instinctual self, as well as the respect I need to have for it. It also taught me that my hunger was a great guide to my authentic self. My wolf dog is a magnificent guide in the world of the unconscious. Jungian psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz says this beautifully. She says, listen, the experience of the self brings a feeling of standing on solid ground inside oneself on a patch of inner eternity, which even physical death cannot touch. Let me say that again. The experience of the self brings a feeling of standing on solid ground inside oneself on a patch of inner eternity, which even physical death cannot touch. And I had this experience in my dream when I connected to that wolf dog creature. And coincidentally, the experience of the self is also what alchemists refer to as squaring the circle. It is a struggle that many men and women have gone through with centuries, attempting to reconcile the fixed square of reality with the circular motion of the infinite. Without knowing anything, the power of the image alone would have told me that this was significant. It is archetypal in the Jungian sense of an image being part of the collective unconscious. And thus it contains a power of representation beyond the limits of the personal. It's a liminal image. It's a prescient image. And it's about the idea that trusting the true hunger of the soul leads you off the beaten track where the square of reality meets the circle of infinite wisdom. And this wisdom is in the power of nature herself, in the instinctual life, in the earth, in the animals as represented by the spirit animal of my dream. And this is where real nourishment for the soul can be found. Some say that modernity is a permanent state of liminality. And actually, the word liminality comes from the Latin limen, meaning threshold. It is as if unbeknownst to ourselves, we have stumbled through the threshold into chaos, where we have left what was familiar and often routine, and we are in the tunnel and we don't know where we will end up or how it will turn out. No one knows exactly what will happen at the other end. And mostly because this is not a normal initiation, and I'll talk about that later. Normal as the type of rites of passage that happen in small-scale societies. There's no tradition of ritual to take us through this the way a shaman or a medicine man. We are being asked to return, I believe, to our first master of ceremony, the greatest shaman of all, the only one we can trust, Mother Earth herself. Can you hear her speak? What is she saying? She says, be still, listen. She says, stop all this work, which is destruction. She says, if I cannot breathe, neither will you be able to breathe. If my lungs are being cut down, yours will cease to function as well. This is the moment right now, if you will it so. Stop destroying life, or eventually you will destroy yourself. Perhaps it will take a virus to destroy the virus of never-ending greed and death-dealing choices full of lies. Behold the whales visiting places for the first time in 500 years. And through the clear skies, the Himalayas show their bright white crests to city dwellers for the first time in generations. Listen to the birds singing strong for the first time in 100 years, and the grass standing taller in the fields. Listen from inside your heart as if your life depends on it. Because it does. And what is it telling you? And what can we do now? Nothing. So long as we are satisfied with the status quo, with being out of tune with Earth. Or we can begin to put ourselves in order, as the rainmaker did back in ancient China. I have told this story before. I have. But it's worth telling again. And in my defense, Carl Jung used to tell this story all the time. Obviously, because it's worth repeating. And when we look at our history, we humans tend to be slow learners, no matter how fast the speed of our internet. So here's the story. In the ancient Chinese province of Kiaochu, there was a drought that was so severe, both humans and animals were dying. All the religious leaders were trying to solicit relief from their gods. The Catholics made processions. The Protestants did their prayers. The Chinese fired guns to chase away demons, but nothing was working. So finally, someone remembered this monk, this little old man in a faraway province who was known as the Rainmaker, and perhaps they should have him come. And so they did. As soon as the old man arrived in Kiaochu, he asked for a hut outside in the outskirts of the town and to be left alone for 3 days and nights. And at the end of 3 days and nights, lo and behold, it rained. And not only did it rain, but it even snowed, which was unheard of at that time. Well, Willem, who was Jung's friend, the one who told him the story in the first place and apparently was a witness to it, got permission to interview the old man, the rainmaker. And he asked him how he had made it rain. And the old man said that it wasn't him at all, that he had nothing to do with making it rain. So Willem was not satisfied with that answer. And then he asked the rainmaker, well, okay then, what did you do in that hut for 3 days and nights? And so the rainmaker responded, well, where I come from, things are in order, in Tao. They are in harmony with nature. There's a oneness with nature. And then when I came to Kiaochu, things here are out of order. And so I also became out of order, which is why I asked to be left alone for 3 days and nights so I could put myself back in order. And then, of course, what happened, happened. The rain came. So the question then comes, is the Tao, which is supposed to express this sense of order or oneness with nature, only an inner personal phenomenon? Or is there some correspondence between the inner world and the outer world? Well, Carl Jung spoke about this a lot. His notion of synchronicity is dedicated to this idea that our inner states have a bearing on outer events, and then outer events are a mirror back to our own internal struggles with the understanding of wisdom, truth, beauty, and so on. And this idea speaks to another concept, the concept of interdependence, which is something that recently people are becoming more familiar with and that scientists have been dealing with for quite a long time. And that is the primary notion that any organism, be it human or non-human, cannot be studied separately from the environment in which it exists. We're not separate. We can be physically at a distance, but we are all related, for we are all dependent on planet Earth. So what else can we turn to in these times? Who knows the path through the threshold and into the unknown? Who understands the meaning and import of crossroads? Who walks between day and night and lives in places of in-between? Who can illuminate the path and help the traveler in the darkness? Who travels freely between this world and the underworld? Hecate. And actually in Greek, it's pronounced Hecate. She is this ancient goddess, daughter of Titans, so before the Olympians. And she was granted dominion of the sky, earth, and the underworld. She also has the power of prophecy and protection. She lives in the cave between worlds, and she can hear the cries of the goddess Demeter and help her find her daughter Persephone. She also helps Persephone in her new role as queen of the underworld. Hecate is the triple goddess of past, present, and future. She's mother, maiden, and crone. She carries 2 torches, and she has black dogs as well. She's both fearsome and loving, mother of witches, who can speak to the living and the dead. And perhaps she can help us find our way back to love. the love of nature, which is our nature, love for the stranger or the other, which is assuredly love for our most unloved self. So, what does it mean for us today to be at the crossroads with Ikate? It means instead of avoiding this moment with binging on Netflix or carrot cake or the daily news feed, we actually turn toward the difficulty. We put ourselves in order during this liminal space and time we find ourselves in. This rather monastic way of being we have already been pushed into can actually be practiced on a daily basis. Meditation is such a practice, of course, but so is rising and paying attention to our dreams. And creativity is a great mediator of liminality. Through poetry, music, drawing, painting, dancing, singing, walking at sunrise and sunset, which is what I do a lot. In anthropology, liminality is the quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle stage of a rite of passage, when participants no longer hold their pre-ritual status, but have not yet begun the transition to the status they will hold when the rite is complete. So the concept of liminality was first developed in the early 20th century by Arnold von Gennep, and then later taken up by Victor Turner. Let's see if we can find them. There they are. Today, this term describes political and cultural change as well as rites of passage. During liminal periods of all kinds, social hierarchies may be reversed or temporarily dissolved, and continuity of tradition may become uncertain, as well as future outcomes, once taken for granted, may be thrown into doubt. The dissolution of order during liminality is, I believe, purposeful. It creates a fluid, malleable situation that enables new institutions and customs to become established. Potentially, it is a time and a space of infinite possibilities. In such a liminal situation, the initiates live outside their normal environment. And so they can question themselves and the existing social order through the series of rituals that actually often involve acts of pain. And this is for small scale societies that these men researched. The initiates can come to feel nameless, spatially and temporally dislocated, and socially unstructured. In this sense, liminal periods are destructive as well as constructive. In other words, the formative experiences during liminality will prepare the initiate and his or her cohort to occupy a new social role or status made public during the reintegration phase of the rituals. The qualities of liminality in a rite of passage are in essence chaotic, destructive, and involve a feeling of dislocation. When Van Gennep coined the term liminality in his book, Rites of Passage, which, by the way, was published in 1909, so this is not new. He was exploring that concept in the context of rites in, as I mentioned, small scale societies. For Van Gennep, such rituals share a specific threefold sequence or sequential structure. There's the preliminal rite, which is a rite of separation, where the initiate is separated from his regular life and practices and routines. And you see that today with the virus, when we're forced to separate from normal work and family relationships and shelter in place or be in quarantine. The second phase is the liminal rites or the transition rites. And in small scale societies, they have these two essential characteristics. First, the rite must follow strictly prescribed sequence where everybody knows what to do and how. And second, everything must be done under the authority of what they refer to, what Van Gennep and Turner refer to as the master of ceremonies. In other words, a mediator between worlds, a shaman or a medicine person. Medicine person, because they could be either male or female. Same with shamans. This middle stage, when the transition takes place, implies an actual passing through the threshold that marks the boundary between the two phases. And that's when the term liminality was introduced in order to characterize this passage. And then the third phase of the structure he calls post-liminal rites or rites of incorporation. And during this stage, the initiate is reincorporated into the society with a new identity or as a new being, if you will. Anytime we go through a change, whether it's physical or emotional, psychological, social, we enter a liminal phase. Our bodies know this. We know this instinctually. Giving birth is a tremendous liminal experience for both mother and child. The risk of death is present, no matter how sophisticated our medical apparatus. Leaving childhood behind to enter adolescence is a liminal experience. Right? The chaos, the dislocation, the hormones, all these elements are present. We experience it physically. When we leave high school to go to college, we enter this stage as well in marriage preparations. And we enter it again when we go through a divorce. When we move or we take on a new job, a serious illness, an accident, all these can be liminal experiences. And they are actually gifts that life provides to teach us about what is essential. They are reminders that we are ensouled beings as well as embodied. And there are also preparations, all of these experiences, for our ultimate rite of passage, the one that takes us from being born into life to being born into death. Liminality is always a time of looking inward towards self and toward a spiritual connection. It's a time of introspection and surrender, of letting go and finding new meaning when the old has been rendered meaningless. Victor Turner is considered to have, Victor Turner is considered to have rediscovered Van Gennep's work in the 60s, actually. And he wrote his own book called The Forest of Symbols. And there's an essay in it called Betwixt and Between, which is about the liminal period in rites of passage. And Turner began to make these associations between small scale societies and larger societies, or tribal and non-tribal societies. And he became aware that liminality served not only to identify the importance of in-between periods, but also to understand the human reactions to liminal experiences. For Turner, the attributes of liminality or liminal persona, in other words, threshold people, are necessarily ambiguous. So if liminality is regarded as a time and space of withdrawal from normal modes of social action, interaction, it potentially, again, that word potential, right, can be seen as a period of examination of the central values of the culture. Since, as he puts it, the very structure of society is temporarily suspended. According to Turner, all liminality must eventually dissolve, because it is a state of great intensity that cannot exist very long without some sort of structure to stabilize it. Either the individual returns to the surrounding social structure, or else liminal communities develop their own internal social structure. And Turner calls that normative communitas. And he talks about different types of communities, but he has a very utopian idea about this, and he thinks of it as very positive. He thinks of liminal situations as ways of renewal, which they can be. But a liminal situation can also be a period of uncertainty, of anguish, and even the existential fear of facing the abyss. And as I mentioned at the beginning, liminal situations, liminality, has both spatial and temporal dimensions. And it can be applied to all kinds of subjects, from individuals to larger groups, to whole societies, and even entire civilizations. And the coronavirus, which has thrown us into liminal space, is certainly affecting us on a global level, I would say. There's a chart that I'm going to show you, which summarizes the different dimensions and subjects of liminal experiences, and it also provides key examples for each category. So, of course, on the right side with society, it includes war and plagues and so on. Another significant variable of liminality is scale and degree. In other words, there are degrees of liminality. And the degree depends on the extent to which the liminal experience can be weighed against persisting structures. So, will things truly be affected? Will there be a permanent change? That's the question. And it depends. It depends on the intensity and the length of the period of liminality. When the spatial and temporal are both deeply affected, then the intensity of the liminal experience increases, and so-called pure liminality is approached. Liminality in large-scale societies differs in significant ways from those found in small groups in tribal societies. And one primary characteristic of liminality in a smaller group is that there is a way in and a way out. And the members of the society are themselves aware that they are in this liminal state. And they know they will leave it sooner or later. And they have ceremony masters to guide them through the ritual. In large-scale societies who are in those liminal periods, the onset of the liminal period is usually or generally unexpected and unpredictable, even though the actions of the society should be a predictor of what is to come. I'm quoting Turner here. The future, what comes after the liminal period, is completely unknown. And there is no ceremony master who can guide us, right? Who's gone through this process before. So that is a situation where the liminal situation can become dangerous. They allow for the emergence of self-proclaimed ceremony masters who assume leadership positions and attempt to perpetuate liminality and then empty the liminal moment of real creativity, of its potential for real change. Not surprisingly, dictatorships are born out of such events. And you'll see, I think in some countries in Europe already, martial law being established by governments. From a Jungian perspective, individuation, the process of individuation, which is what Jungian psychotherapy centers around, can be seen as a movement through liminal space and time, from disorientation to integration. And what takes place in the dark phase of liminality is a process of breaking down in the interest of making whole. So this concept of liminality exists everywhere. You can find it in the Bible, of course, this sacred space in where God imparts his revelation to a person, like the dream of Jacob, where on the ladder he meets with God between heaven and earth. Liminality exists in many aspects of life around us. It is present in our seasons, equinoxes, solstices, New Year's Day. These are all liminal aspects. And in nature, springs, caves, rivers, fords, passes, crossroads, bridges, marshes, all have liminal aspects to it. They have these edges, these fault lines between worlds. And major transformation occur at crossroads, as well as other liminal places. And at least it's partly because liminality, being so unstable, can pave the way for access to esoteric knowledge or understanding of both worlds. Liminality has been a part of human experience since the beginning. And many folk tales, fairy tales, myth contain liminality as an element. You see it in Peau d'Âne, Donkey Skin, the Charles Perrault fairy tale. The character is absolutely in a state of liminality most of the time. She is a liminal being. She wears a donkey skin. She's half animal, half human most of the time. In the Handless Maiden fairy tale by the Grimm brothers, you see the character enter into liminal space after she has to leave her home. And she is herself a liminal character. Her hands have been cut off. She's hasn't eaten in days. She's dirty. Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, they all enter liminal space and time. You find it in mythological characters. I think the myth of Eros' Psyche is full of liminality. Psyche being recognized as being neither a goddess nor human because of her beauty. You, the Welsh hero of mythology, who couldn't be heard during the day or night, whether he was dressed or naked, and so on and so forth. He's finally attacked at dusk, wrapped in a net with one foot in a cauldron and the other on a goat. And you'll find it also in the Mahabharata, where Indra promises he won't kill Vritra day or night, and so on, with anything wet or dry, and he ends up killing him at dusk again with foam. So, as I said, culturally, it's just part of us. From Hamlet to Jane Eyre, from Princess Mononoke to the Twilight Saga, it's part of our cultural makeup. Look at the plays. Guildenstern and Rosencrantz Are Dead by Tom Stoppard, or Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. They take place in liminal space and time, in no man's land. I believe states of liminality arise in the society as a response to the longing of our soul for transcendence. This is another of my pictures. I really like this one. I also took it at sunset, and it's a picture of a cloud, and I call it the cloud swimmer. I think it's a good metaphor for our yearning for transcendence. So these states of liminality arise in order to repair our severed connection from intrinsic wholeness by profoundly and radically disrupting our habitual ways of being and moving. Soul seeks a life that is not purely driven by ego-centered desires, societal demands, or cultural norms, but a life that is connected to spirit. And spirit lives in the in-between. It lives in the poetry of mythic imagination. All these tales, myths, fairy tales, legends, they all remind us of this undeniable truth. And that can torment us when we see our own lives fall short of our soul's inner promptings. Annie Dillard in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek explains this exquisitely. This is what she says. The gaps other thing. The gaps are the spirit's own home, the altitudes and latitudes so dazzlingly spare and clean that the spirit can discover itself for the first time like a once blinded man unbound. Wow. The realm of the in-between is the realm of the call to adventure, as Joseph Campbell tells us, right? It's the realm of mystery where the rules of ordinary life don't apply anymore. And in most of these stories and myths, there is this intrusion of the archetypal world into our day-to-day life. And we often step into it without even realizing it, or sometimes we're dragged into the other world, right at the doorstep of our ordinary life. And perhaps it is this collision of beauty and truth, and in many ways, somehow an act of violence, a breakdown of boundaries, and the prime instigator of imagination. It is as if imagination requires excess, the courage to break through the boundaries of silence, of someone else's rules. And this breaking down of old ideas and boundaries is an important aspect of finding that connection to spirit, and what the genius of myth calls us toward, the deep longing of soul to fully inhabit the world with passion and joy. The in-between is the realm of shamanic travel, of confronting the shadow, of death and resurrection. And in my own experience of such moments, there's always been this undeniable intrusion of the natural world, and most always a herald of a descent. And it can be terrifying and transcendent all at once. And it drags me to the underworld, sometimes to Hades, sometimes to the Elysian fields. The questions we have regarding our destiny cannot be answered from the outside. The answers come from the inner world. We all carry family stories, personal ones, that connect us to the unresolved or unredeemed part of ourselves. And we tend to want to keep them secret, but such secrets can create dis-ease or disorder in our mind, in our heart, or in our body. The nature of the world may then carry or even reflect those burdens back to us in unexpected ways. Our own soul is the medium that connects us to our past and our future, our history, our family, our ghosts, and our destiny. I believe our modern existence makes liminal beings of us all. How it gets acted out in the world depends on whether our hearts can be made to break open or else remain closed. So perhaps one memorable such experience of liminality for me is what happened after my Aunt Adita died. She was married, well, she was a widow, and then she got remarried. And she got remarried to a man that that I could not bear to be around him. I couldn't bear to even shake his hand. It was a visceral response. And nobody understood it, not even myself. And it made things kind of difficult for my family, and I got chastised for it quite a few times. I ended up seeing very little of my aunt for the next 10 years after she got remarried. But I couldn't help it. The feeling was so strong, I could not move against it. And then one day, I got a call from my cousin telling me that my aunt had died. And I wanted to know how she died, I asked. And I got an answer that was devastating. Her husband had murdered her in her sleep and then had killed himself afterwards in their bedroom. My intuitive knowing had done nothing to change the fates. And that's one thing you learn from myth, is that you cannot change the fates, not even the gods. A few days later, I was asked by my cousin to come and help with packing things up. And I didn't really want to go, but I agreed. I felt like I needed to, maybe some kind of closure, I don't know. Anyway, I found myself at the threshold of the apartment and I couldn't move inside. From the corner of my eye, I could see the open door to the bedroom, and there was still blood on the sheets where she had died from a bullet in the head, and there was blood on the carpet where he had shot himself in the heart, leaning against the bedpost. I asked myself why on earth I had come, and I just couldn't answer that question. And my cousin said, "Oh, just take anything you want," and I didn't want anything. I stepped into the hallway in this liminal space between ordinary life and violent death. And I heard a voice in my mind. At least I think it was in my mind. And it directed me to my aunt's bathroom. And my aunt had created this whole universe of flowery scents and pink towels in her bathroom. So I followed that command despite my fears and walked into the bathroom. And then I heard the voice again say, "Come closer. It's on the sink." So I approached the sink and I looked up into the mirror and saw this face that at that moment looked so much like my Aunt Adita's. And then I looked down and saw this soap sitting on a soap dish. And it was sitting on a half shell. And the voice emphatically said, "This is yours." And I was like, "Oh, come on. This is getting ridiculous. What is it, some kind of sick joke or something?" But the voice was insistent and said, "Look closer." So I did. I picked up the soap and smelled it, and it brought back memories of my aunt. And then I put it in the sink on the side. And then I picked up the soap dish, which was a half shell of mother of pearl. And I looked at it and it was shining softly. And of course, being who I am, I immediately thought of Aphrodite rising out of the sea. But still, it was rather disappointing. And then I slowly turned the shell around and I became transfixed, because on the back of the shell was the most beautiful, detailed carving on this mother of pearl of what looked like the resurrection. There was a Christ figure rising out of the coffin, the cross discarded on the side, or maybe it was Lazarus rising from the dead, I don't know. But it was the most amazing, beautiful thing I had ever seen. Whether Aphrodite born out of the sea or Christ stepping out of a coffin, it was a deeper understanding for me about the cycle of life and death. That there are these twin-like relationships as inseparable as the marriage of Persephone and Hades, and that one has no meaning without the other. And I, of course, knew then why I had to come. And this was my message from the other side. I had to enter this liminal space in order to receive the gift. This idea that love transcends life and death. And to know a truth beyond human understanding in this visceral way, thanks to a soap dish, I guess. This is what the liminal experience can hold. This is the potential of the liminal experience. We are art that life has created. And our own art of living life expresses our gratitude for this gift. It illuminates the gift and our unique perspective on what it means to be alive and how we cooperate with this life, what kind of melody we add to the music of Earth. New awareness or consciousness arises without going through the door of new perception and imagination. And that door is lumen, threshold, right? The threshold into liminality. And it's always a descent at first, where old points of view and ideas about ourselves, our story must be discarded. This is the process of initiation with its time spent in liminality, in the in-between. We have all experienced those portals of loss, illness, terror. And some of us spent our whole childhood in liminality. To open this door to new awareness, to understanding or point of view, requires an attitude of acceptance of what is, curiosity for what is to come, and the imagination to embrace what we may become. We want to instigate a movement of soul away from pathology and the terrorism of our own story toward balance, by restoring our connection between soul and matter, and realizing that there are different iterations of the same oneness, and therefore one is no less sacred than the other. And this can be done through the awareness that every thought we have, every action we take has metaphorical implications as well as material ones. We either destroy the relationship between ourselves and the world around us, or we mend it. And I think it's important to explore things imaginally to that end. Joseph Campbell tells us that mythologies that once structured society are scattered, broken up all around us, but that we can select any of these fragments that activate our imagination for our use. And for me, and I'm offering this to you as well, one such helpful image to contemplate is the Fool of the Tarot. There he is. The Fool shows us how to begin traveling into new territory and what attitude to take. You see the 0, that's the number of the Fool, contains both emptiness and infinite possibility. To know nothing and be open to all things is the beginner's mind of the Buddhists. The Fool archetype takes us out of the hubris of I already know and the hopelessness of what's the use. And it puts us in a state of curiosity and candor and out of fear and worry, which can kill the imagination. It brings humor and vitality back in the body. And it's the same 0 that quantum physicists contemplate when they talk about 0-point energy, where all matter, all existence arises from and goes back to. In the beginning, there is no story. And I want to talk a little bit about the dog that accompanies the Fool here. I could talk about this for a long, long time, but I won't. The dog is the best friend, the ally, with his natural instincts, intuition, and groundedness. It is the wisdom of the body, the one who knows things before they happen, the physical or emotional earthquakes, whether this person is good for you or not. How often do we override our instincts to fit in for social convention because we think we shouldn't feel this way? And this is tragic in my mind, because with every single time we override our instincts, we disregard our deeper counsel, and we are eroding our connection with our own soul and her desires for life and for our destiny. Another ally to consider in this journey is the inner guide, as represented by the magician. Why the magician? Who is he or she? Well, the magician is that creator aspect who remembers the mystery we came from, and who has all the tools necessary to bring forth the alchemical gold of our soul. He's the one who understands both worlds, like Ikate. When we connect to her or him, we can begin to ask these questions. How does the magician get expressed in my life? How am I connected to or disconnected from my creative life, from its juice, It's fire. How am I connected to earth, fellow inhabitants, plants, rivers, mountains, trees, four-legged, two-legged, whether we are aware of it or not? And this is a time when each one of us must turn within to awaken this inner wise guide, this inner magician. Again, I could talk about this for a very long time, and I'm in the process of developing an online course for PRS as well about that very subject. But I wanted to touch on it today. Life is generous, and it will keep throwing us into liminality and bringing us harder lessons, faster if necessary, until we remember who we are, how we are, and why we are. That all souls on board are part of the soul of Earth. Life creates opportunities for us to make a fundamental spiritual shift in our perceptions and finally see what is real, what is essential, what is important, if we're willing. I think it's William Blake who said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but that if our perception was washed clean, what we would see is the infinite. I'm probably going to end this talk with a poem. I often do. I wasn't going to do it because it's not a very optimistic poem, maybe, but it feels very prescient because I wrote it a year and a half ago, and it seems relevant right now. So I'm going to do it anyway. It's called At the Crossroads. Humanity at the center of twin anxiety and terror. Like a bad hand at a card game you never wanted to play. Sometimes inner states appear outside as fate. There at the crossroads. With nothing to call my own, not my hair, not my hands, and words like alone in a mouth full of sand. Looking for red-headed threads of connection, fleeting like a bird song in a dry summer wind. There at the crossroads, the melancholy heart of wisdom speaks. New fire rising. There at the crossroads. I want to end with, well, first, thank you for listening, and I hope this helps bring some deeper understanding around the concept of liminality and what we're going through today. But I also want to show you or talk about briefly Chief Arvel Looking Horse. There's an interview with him from 10 years ago, and he's sitting in his chair outside in nature. And he's talking about the prophecy of white buffalo calf woman. And basically what he says is, in order for there to be a shift in the course of humankind, which obviously he thought was necessary, he believed it was to be a global undertaking, that no one single group of people could do this. And perhaps this pandemic is the beginning of awareness in that direction. At least it has the potential to be so. Thank you again.